Music is one of the essential ways in which communities exist.
Contemporary music, avant-garde, modernism, postmodernism, noise, experimental music.
So many terms to denominate the music we make today.
What is the relationship of sound to space? What is the relationship of humanly constructed spaces to humanly constructed sounds?
We have a very strong enemy, commercial culture. It's forming our brains, it's forming our way of listening with standard harmony, standard rhythms.
Music is organized sound patterns, stretched and structured over time, that aim to excite the intellect and the heart at the same time.
If I call this a music, then it's music. Because I organize the rhythm, I choose this timbre, and it's music. If it's good or bad, that's another thing. Because music, it's just a definition of the phenomena. It is not quality, nothing to do with it.
Music is everything you listen to with the intention to hear music, which I believe is a very, very beautiful definition, because it allows you to find music, and this means to find beauty in everything you hear.
One sort of story from Irish mythology I always use again and again when I talk about music is the story of Finn McCool, one of the most important Irish mythological heroes, sitting with his warriors around the fire, and they're discussing what is music, what is the best music in the world. And, you know, somebody says, oh, it's the music of the fiddle, and somebody else says, oh, it's the sound of the wind through the trees, or, you know, X, Y, Z. They all go around and they say, of course, to Finn, what do you think is the greatest music in the world? And he says, it's the music of what happens.
Pour moi, la musique, c'est avant tout des vibrations. Donc des vibrations, bien sûr, physiques, parce que le son, ce sont des vibrations dans l'air, mais des vibrations aussi pour réunir les gens. Et en plus, vraiment, on peut aller n'importe où, en fait, avec le son. On peut vibrer avec n'importe qui, n'importe où, dans n'importe quel pays, dans n'importe quelle culture. Donc ça, c'est juste énorme, en fait. On n'a pas besoin de mots.
contemporary music, avant-garde, modernism, postmodernism, noise, experimental music. It is so many terms used to name or denominate the music we make today. I'd like to think avant-garde is something historical. It's very referring to the 60s and 70s, when a very interesting period, I think, where you have had some kind of a liberating spirit roaming around Europe and America, and I think the whole world probably, where it became possible to work with sound and not using a string quartet or an orchestra. So then this liberation of the traditional medium maybe was, I think, an avant-garde accomplishment.
Avant-garde used to be something that was very meant to provoke and upset the bourgeoisie. It'd be something ahead, literally ahead of what other people were doing. We don't think about the avant-garde that way anymore. We think about it as inventing things which then can be shared with people.
What can be the ingredient of a musical piece? Today it can be noises, sounds like field recordings, so sounds hailing from urban environments or naturalistic environments, but of course also the acoustic sounds which we know from acoustic instrumental practice. So it's such an open field. Then we have the synthesized sounds. We are now capable of merging both the sounds hailing from the acoustic world with the sounds hailing from the synthetical world.
New movements in visual art get incorporated into popular culture much more quickly than new movements in music, right? Think about, the most avant-garde visual art forms going back to the turn of the 20th century, whether it's Cubism and then abstract expressionism. Well, you see these things in advertisements for diapers, right? But music that was produced in Vienna between the wars, right, 100 years ago, is still thought to be extremely difficult music.
There is definitely a small community of people interested in new music, but again, that's true of all new work in art in general. And Interfaces sets out to try and broaden the range of people who come into contact with work that's being done today in sound.
The main objective of the Interfaces project can be summarized in 5 minutes, but I think the best summary is just a few words. And I think the main objective is simply to bring new music to new audiences. Well, the idea is that various forms of contemporary music are reaching a very, very, very small public, even though there's quite a few people making this kind of music. You can ask why this is the case, but you can also do something about it. And this project is about doing something about it.
Si vous sortez de la salle de concert, stricto sensu, si vous allez out of door, en plein air, si vous allez dans le musée, si vous allez dans un espace de performance, vous changez sans doute le type, le rapport à la musique et le type de public aussi. Parce qu'on voit très bien qu'il y a une certaine sociologie de public qui va dans la grande salle de concert philharmonique pour voir de l'orchestre. Il y a un tout autre public qui va aller au centre Pompidou visiter le musée. Et du coup, les personnes qui viennent assister à ça ne sont pas du tout le public habituel de la musique contemporaine. Et je trouve que la force d'Interface, c'est justement d'avoir lié le lieu, le format et les nouveaux publics. Nouveaux lieux, nouveaux formats, nouveaux publics.
So the idea was to experiment with ways in which people come into contact with new sound, new music, new forms of sonic art. Different formats of concert, different educational experiences, different spaces, different ways of organizing the experience of listening, using natural spaces, using different technologies, using archaeological spaces, architectural spaces, anything that alters the way from the very 19th century concert situation that has dominated the way we listen to music over the last many years. Interfaces and a lot of the stuff we do at the OCC could be put as education. I'd like to think that a lot of what we do is less top-down than education might be. I mean, we like to get people to experience things, and we hope that that experience sort of opens up new perspectives for them.
It would be great if we had an education in listening, but then it would be great if that would be an education in the sensibility of listening, rather than an education to what you should listen to. This is more important, to teach listening, including how we can name it, how we can speak about it, what is implicit, for example, also to some music, what is implicit in historically even, or socially, or economically.
Hacking and building your own instruments is definitely a way to search out sounds that don't exist already and to create something that's your own custom sound. People can learn to make instruments without having a lot of money. You can get quite hands-on and messy with it. You don't have to sort of stay with this nice, clean, commercial sound.
The way of capturing sounds and making a representation, we only have sense recording technology. So I think in that sense, it's still a young practice. If we're talking about 1880s, the first recording equipment. So the time span in terms of cultural practices, it's in fact a very young field still. I always see it as a blessing in terms of the fact that it needs definition. So all of us in a sense are trying to pioneer something, and that's part of the spirit that I think brings us somehow together at these events. But at the same time, it comes with a responsibility that each one of us is contributing something to a culture that's in the making.
I know that since Timothy Leary used the famous words tune out, that both music, radio and television or equivalent have been in the background for the majority of society. And therefore passive listening, passive looking has become part of our society. Because art is not about tuning out. Art is about the awareness, the communication, the deep emotional connection, and also, you know, often a deep intellectual connection. You can't do that passively.
Contemporary music can change our relationship to society. I don't think it can necessarily change society. Society has changed and it has accepted it in a different way. We have learnt to listen in new ways, and we'll always learn, we'll always progress. Society always catches up, and then we go further and push further and further.
I believe that the principal, let's say, political potential of art is shifting categories of thought, making us see things in different ways, making us realize that things we thought were absolutely set in stone, in fact, are constructs, and that we can think in different ways about them. And this is best done through experimentation, through pushing boundaries, through trying different ways of doing things. So I think it's super important, especially in an age where, you know, things are becoming more and more solidified and reified, and the way, you know, we're constantly under a barrage of very much preset ideas and conceptions about how the world is, how the world should be. And we're in a period of great freedom, in a sense. I mean, in a way, we live in the freest age ever, but only because that freedom doesn't matter at the end of the day. You know, we can be as free as we like, the system goes on. So you have to sort of rethink all these relationships, and I think art is one way to, not the only way, but it's one important way of doing that.
I always come back to a quotation of the French mathematician and editor of the first encyclopedia, d'Alembert. He wrote a little book called About the Freedom of Music, 1752, before the French Revolution. And there he's saying, all forms of freedom are bound together. The freedom of music starts the freedom of the feeling, starts the freedom of the thinking, and starts the freedom of acting. And the freedom of acting is the enemy number one of the state. So if you want to keep the monarchy, don't change the form of the opera. When you start to change, you don't know where it ends. And this is the task that I think the new music has.